On November 25th, 1177, in a muddy field between Ramla and the sea, a dying teenager led 500 knights against 26,000 warriors of Islam's greatest general. No rational observer would have bet on the boy. By sunset, Saladin's army would be destroyed, and history would remember this as one of the most improbable victories of the medieval age. But this story doesn't begin with triumph. It begins 6 months earlier, in a sick room in Jerusalem, where a young king was learning what it means to rule when your own body has declared war against you. The sound of battle fades. Golden light dissolves into softer morning rays filtering through narrow windows. The air grows still, carrying the scent of vinegar and medicinal herbs. Jerusalem, early morning, May 1177. In the private chambers of the royal palace, 16-year-old Baldwin sits alone. His right hand rests on a small table before him, while his physician, an elderly Syrian with gentle fingers, carefully unwraps the linen bandages. The cloth comes away slowly, layer after layer, revealing skin that should belong to a healthy young man but doesn't. The king's face remains expressionless as he watches. His features still carry traces of boyhood, the soft jawline not yet hardened into manhood, but his eyes have seen too much too soon. They are the eyes of someone who has learned to watch his own deterioration with clinical detachment. The final layer of bandage falls away. Baldwin flexes his fingers experimentally. The thumb responds. The index finger moves sluggishly. The middle finger barely twitches. The ring finger and smallest finger remain curled, unresponsive, as if they belong to someone else's hand. The physician's expression says what his mouth will not. Words would only make it real. Baldwin draws a slow breath through his nose, holds it, releases it. "How long?" he asks quietly. "Before I cannot hold a sword." The physician looks away toward the narrow window, where Jerusalem's morning light turns the stone walls amber. "My lord, you should not have to hold a sword. You are a king, not a... I am both." Baldwin's voice is soft, but carries an edge like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. "And Saladin knows I am dying." The door opens without ceremony. William of Tyre enters carrying no scrolls or books, which means this is a personal visit, not an official one. He is 47 years old, his face lined with the particular weariness that comes from watching someone you love suffer without the power to stop it. He was Baldwin's tutor before the crown, the one who discovered the boy's condition during a childhood game when Baldwin did not cry out after another child bit his arm hard enough to draw blood. The memory lives in the space between them, unspoken, but always present. William nods to the physician, who bows and withdraws with the careful silence of someone who has learned when to leave powerful men alone. The door closes with a soft sound that seems too final. "William." Baldwin's greeting is warm despite everything. This man is the closest thing to a father he has. "My lord." William approaches and sits without being asked, another sign of their intimacy. In public, they maintain the proper distance between king and archbishop. In private, they are tutor and student, older brother and younger, father and son in all but blood. The bandages will need changing again by evening. They always do. Baldwin rests his left hand over his right, hiding the curled fingers. "Tell me something that isn't about my body. Please." William allows himself a small smile. Philip of Flanders has arrived at Acre. His ships came in yesterday at dawn. He brings 300 knights and twice that number in men-at-arms. For the first time this morning, something like hope flickers across Baldwin's face. 300 knights. That could change everything. He stands, moving to the narrow window that overlooks the city. Jerusalem spreads below, golden stone and ancient walls, the holiest city in Christendom, the one his father and grandfather and great-grandfather fought to hold. If Philip agrees to serve as regent, if he leads the invasion of Egypt alongside the Byzantine fleet, we could finally break Saladin's grip, cut his empire in half. William says nothing for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of a man who has lived in this land long enough to understand its patterns. "Philip is a great lord from the west. He owes you nothing. His lands and titles are in Flanders. He came on pilgrimage to fulfill a vow to see Jerusalem before he dies. But if he sees the need, he will see a 16-year-old Leper King asking him to risk his life for a kingdom that might not survive another decade. William's words are gentle but unsparing. You must understand what you're asking. You're asking a healthy, powerful count to subordinate himself to a dying boy. Baldwin turns from the window. In the morning light, his bandaged hands look like the hands of a monk who has mortified his flesh for God. Then I will make him an offer he cannot refuse: regency, command of the army, a share of whatever we conquer in Egypt. Philip didn't come all this way just to pray. No, William agrees. But he also didn't come to die in the desert. Be careful, Baldwin. Desperation makes us offer more than we should give. The king returns to his chair, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who has learned that sudden movements bring pain. He sits and looks at his former tutor, with eyes that are far too old for his face. We are surrounded, William. Saladin controls Egypt to the south, Damascus and Aleppo to the north and east. Every year he grows stronger. Every year we grow weaker. I have no heir. I cannot marry. The great families are already positioning themselves for when I die. He pauses, and in that pause lives all the grief of knowing your own end. How long do you think I have? William's throat works as he swallows. The physicians say. The physicians know nothing. How long do you think I have? The archbishop looks at the boy he taught to read Latin, to understand Aristotle, to think strategically about warfare and politics. The boy who learned all of it faster than any student he'd ever taught, as if aware even then that his time would be short and he must absorb everything quickly. 5 years, perhaps 7 if God is merciful. Then I have 5 years to secure the kingdom's future, 5 years to find a strategy that survives my death. Baldwin's voice does not waver. He has had months to accept this. That is why Philip matters. If he agrees to help, if we can deal Saladin a decisive blow while I still live, the kingdom might survive long enough for a proper succession. A knock at the door interrupts them. A young squire enters, bows deeply. My lord, Count Philip of Flanders has arrived. He requests an audience at your convenience. Baldwin glances at William, who nods slightly. Tell the count I will receive him within the hour, and send word to the high court. I want Raymond of Tripoli, Beaumont of Antioch, and Reynald of Chatillon present. This concerns the whole kingdom. The squire bows again and withdraws. In the silence that follows, William stands and moves toward the door, then pauses. Baldwin. Whatever Philip decides, remember that you have already accomplished what many thought impossible. You have ruled for 3 years with leprosy. You have held the kingdom together when it should have torn itself apart. That matters. It will matter more if the kingdom survives me. The king's voice is steady, but there is something underneath it, a current of fear that he allows only William to hear. If I die and everything collapses, then these 3 years of suffering will have been for nothing. I will be remembered only as the Leper King who failed. William opens his mouth to speak, closes it, opens it again. You are not defined by your disease. You are defined by what you choose to do despite it. After William leaves, Baldwin sits alone in the quiet morning. He unwraps his right hand again and forces the dead fingers to move through sheer willpower. They tremble but do not bend. He tries again. Nothing. The disease is patient and inexorable. It will take everything from him piece by piece, and there's no force on earth that can stop it. But there are things he can still do. Battles he can still fight. A kingdom he can still serve. He rings the small bell on his table. Servants appear to help him dress for the audience with Philip. The bandages are rewrapped, fresh and white. The robes of kingship are placed carefully around his shoulders. The crown is set upon his head, lighter than it looks but heavier than anything he has ever carried. By the time Philip of Flanders enters the throne room an hour later, Baldwin has composed his face into the mask of royalty. No pain shows, no fear. Only the quiet confidence of a king who knows what he needs and intends to get it. Philip is tall and broad-shouldered, 44 years old, with the weathered face of a man who has spent his life in the saddle. He wears his wealth carefully, rich fabrics and fine leather, but not ostentatiously. He kneels before Baldwin with proper respect, though his eyes flick briefly to the bandaged hands before looking away. "Count Philip," Baldwin's voice carries through the chamber. "You honor us with your presence. Jerusalem has long needed knights of your quality." Philip rises. "My Lord King, I come as a pilgrim to fulfill my vow. I am honored to see the holy city and to meet its defender." The words are correct but carefully neutral. Baldwin hears what is not said. "I came to pray, not to fight your wars. Your arrival is God's providence." Baldwin gestures for Philip to approach. Around them stand the great lords of the kingdom: Raymond of Tripoli, calculating and cautious; Bohemond of Antioch, proud and suspicious; and Reynold of Châtillon, recently married to Stephanie of Milly, standing with the coiled stillness of a man who has learned patience in a Muslim prison, but has not forgotten how to kill. "We are preparing an expedition against Egypt," Baldwin continues. "A coordinated assault with Byzantine naval forces. If successful, we will cut Saladin's empire in half and secure Jerusalem for generations." He pauses, letting the vision take shape. "I offer you command of this expedition. You would serve as regent of the kingdom and lead our combined forces. Any territories conquered would be held by your house." The offer is extraordinary. Philip's face reveals nothing, but Baldwin sees the calculation happening behind his eyes. Regent of Jerusalem, conqueror of Egypt. It is the kind of glory that builds dynasties. But then Philip's gaze drifts again to Baldwin's bandaged hands, and the king sees the truth. This man from the north sees a dying leper boy trying to buy help with promises that might not survive the year. "My lord," Philip says carefully, "I am deeply honored, but I must be honest with you. I came as a pilgrim, not a conqueror. My lands in Flanders require my attention. I cannot remain in the east for the years such a campaign would require." He glances at Raymond and Bohemond. "However, I understand that there are pressing matters in the north. The fortress of Harim threatens Christian territories. If Count Raymond and Prince Bohemond agree, I would be honored to assist in securing your northern borders." The words land like stones in still water. Baldwin understands immediately what has happened. Philip is refusing the Egyptian campaign, refusing the regency, choosing instead a safer, shorter expedition in the north that will let him fulfill his crusading vows without committing to Jerusalem's survival. Raymond of Tripoli steps forward, already sensing opportunity. "My lord, if Count Philip is willing to help secure Harim, it would free considerable resources. The fortress has been a thorn in our side for months." Bohemond nods agreement. They want this. A northern campaign with a wealthy count from Europe, far from Jerusalem's complicated politics and dying king. Baldwin feels the moment slipping away. He could order them to stay, but orders without the power to enforce them are worse than useless. He could plead, but kings do not plead. He could offer more, but he has already offered everything he has to give. "How many men would you need?" His voice is level, betraying nothing. Raymond does not hesitate. "Most of the Hospitaller contingent, a significant portion of the Templars, the armies of Tripoli and Antioch." "Leaving Jerusalem with what?" The question comes from Reynold, his voice rough from disuse. He's been silent until now, watching with the flat eyes of a predator. "You would strip the kingdom's defenses for a border fort?" "Harim is strategic," Raymond counters, "and with Count Philip's men, Saladin won't care about Harim." Reynold's interruption is blunt. He cares about Jerusalem, and the moment he learns our army is 8 days' march to the north, he will come. Philip shifts uncomfortably. This argument is exactly what he wanted to avoid. Surely Sultan Saladin would not break the truce. There is no truce worth the parchment it's written on. Reynold's tone makes clear what he thinks of northern nobles who understand nothing of this land. Saladin is patient, he is cautious, but he is also opportunistic. You want to go north? Fine, but don't pretend it's strategy. Call it what it is. You'd rather fight a siege than face the Sultan in open battle. The throne room falls silent. Philip's face darkens with anger, but he cannot deny the accusation without confirming it. Baldwin watches the alliance he needed crumble before it was ever built. Enough. The word is quiet but cuts through the tension. Baldwin stands, and despite his youth and bandaged hands, something in his bearing makes grown men pause. Count Philip, you are our guest, and you honor us with your presence. If you wish to assist Count Raymond in the north, you have our blessing. But understand this, Jerusalem will not be stripped defenseless. Some forces will remain. He looks at Raymond. You may take your men of Tripoli. Prince Beaumont, you may take yours from Antioch. The Hospitallers may go if they choose. His gaze moves to the Grand Master of the Templars, a grim man in a white mantle. How many Templars can you spare? I can spare none, my lord, the Grand Master says flatly, but I can lend you some. Count Raymond may have half our strength, the rest remain to guard the kingdom. It is not enough. Baldwin knows it. Everyone in the room knows it. If Saladin comes while the army is divided, Jerusalem will fall. But Philip has already made his choice, and Raymond and Beaumont have smelled opportunity in the north. They will go, and Baldwin cannot stop them without tearing the eagle. Kingdom apart from within. Then it is decided. Baldwin sits again, the movement carefully controlled. May God grant you victory at Harim. I pray we will not have cause to regret this division of strength. The audience ends with proper courtesies, but the damage is done. As the lords file out, only Reynold remains behind. He approaches the throne and speaks in a voice low enough that only Baldwin can hear. They're fools. Philip is afraid of your disease. Raymond and Beaumont see weakness and want to carve out their own glory. When Saladin hears about this, he will come, and we will have perhaps 500 knights to stop him. Baldwin meets the older man's eyes. Then we will have to be enough. Reynold's scarred face shows something that might be respect. I was imprisoned by the Muslims for 15 years. I know what they're capable of. Saladin is not like the petty emirs we've fought before. He is brilliant, patient, ruthless when he needs to be. If he comes, it won't be a raid. It will be an invasion. I know, Baldwin's voice is very quiet. But I also know that if we hide behind walls every time we're outnumbered, we will lose without ever fighting. Sometimes you have to ride out and meet the enemy, even when the odds are impossible. You sound like a man who has nothing to lose. I don't. The simple truth of it hangs in the air between them. I am dying, Reynold. My body betrays me more each day. The kingdom's future is uncertain. Philip just refused to help us. Our army is about to march north, leaving us defenseless. What exactly do I have to lose that isn't already lost? Reynold studies him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he kneels. Then I am yours, my lord. Stephanie's lands guard the southern approaches. If Saladin comes, he will come through Ultra Jordan. My men will watch. And when the moment comes, I will ride with you, even if it's just the two of us against his entire army. Baldwin places his left hand on Reynold's shoulder. His right hand remains curled and useless in his lap. Thank you. I do not know if we can win, but I know we will try. When Reynold leaves, Baldwin sits alone on his throne in the empty chamber. Outside, Jerusalem goes about its business, unaware that its king has just watched his best plan for survival collapse. The Egyptian campaign is dead. The regency offer refused. The army soon to be scattered. He looks at his bandaged hands and feels the disease working beneath the cloth, patient and inevitable. The physicians say 5 years. William says 5 years. But what if it's less? What if he has only months? How does a dying king secure his kingdom's future when time itself is the enemy he cannot defeat? There is no answer in the silence, only the knowledge that when Saladin learns of this division, he will come, and Baldwin will have to face him with whatever forces remain. The sun climbs higher over Jerusalem. The morning audience ends. And in Cairo, 800 miles to the south, another king sits in another palace, receiving reports from his spies about Christian movements in the north. The pieces are moving into position. The board is set. And soon, very soon, everything will converge on a muddy field called Montgisard, where a dying teenager and 500 knights will face the impossible and somehow, impossibly, prevail. But that day has not yet come. For now, there is only the waiting, the preparing, the slow accumulation of small decisions that will determine whether a kingdom survives or falls. Baldwin rises from his throne and walks slowly back to his chambers, his body aching with every step, his mind already calculating what comes next. Philip of Flanders' army marches north on November 10th, 1177. The sound of their departure echoes through Jerusalem's streets, 300 northern knights in gleaming armor, their horses fresh and their spirits high. They are going to glory at Harim, to a siege where the odds are manageable and the enemy contained behind walls. Raymond of Tripoli rides with them, and Bohemond of Antioch, and most of the Knights Hospitaller. The kingdom of Jerusalem watches its strength walk away. Baldwin stands on the palace wall as the last of the column disappears beyond the hills. William of Tyre stands beside him, saying nothing because there is nothing left to say. The king's face shows no emotion, but his left hand grips the stone parapet with enough force that his knuckles whiten. His right hand hangs useless at his side, the bandages already spotted with blood from where the disease has opened new sores. "How long do you think before Saladin hears?" Baldwin asks quietly. "His spies are everywhere, days perhaps, a week at most." William pauses. "What will you do?" "What I must." The king turns from the wall. "Send word to Gaza. I want an inventory of every knight, every horse, every sword we have left, and send a rider to Reynold at Kerak. Tell him to watch the southern approaches. If Saladin moves, I need to know immediately." 8 days later, the news arrives. Not from Reynold, but from terrified refugees streaming north from Ramla. Saladin has crossed into the kingdom with an army that blackens the earth. 26,000 men, they say, though fear always inflates numbers. The Sultan's forces are moving fast along the coastal road, raiding and burning, heading toward Jerusalem with nothing to stop them. Baldwin receives the news in the throne room with only his closest advisors present. The young king who weeks ago watched his strength march away now faces the consequence of that departure. He listens to the reports without interrupting. Saladin left Cairo on November 18th. His army sacked Ramla and Lod. They are spreading out to plunder the countryside, confident and unopposed. "How many knights do we have in Jerusalem?" Baldwin's voice is steady. The constable, an older man who has served 3 kings, answers reluctantly. 375, my lord. Perhaps 400 if we count every knight in the city, including those unfit for campaign. And the Templars at Gaza. 84 knights under Grand Master Odo de Santamand. The mathematics are brutal. Even if every knight in Jerusalem and Gaza rode together, they would field fewer than 500 mounted warriors against Saladin's thousands. It is suicide to meet him in open battle. The only rational choice is to retreat behind Jerusalem's walls and pray the fortifications hold until Philip returns from the north. But Baldwin has spent 3 years learning that rationality and survival are not always the same thing. If he retreats to Jerusalem, Saladin will simply bypass the city and ravage the kingdom until nothing remains. The people will die. The farms will burn. And when Philip finally returns, there will be nothing left to defend. "We ride for Ascalon," Baldwin says. The words fall into the chamber like stones into deep water. Immediately, every knight who can sit a horse, we force Saladin to acknowledge us. We make him deal with us rather than ignore us. The constable's face goes pale. "My lord, with respect, Ascalon is directly in Saladin's path. You would be riding toward him, not away." "Yes." Baldwin stands, and despite his bandaged hands and the tremor that now affects his left leg, there is something in his bearing that makes argument difficult. If we stay in Jerusalem, we are irrelevant. If we ride to Ascalon, we are a threat he must address. Even if he bottles us up there, he cannot simply ignore a royal army at his back. Reynold of Chatillon, summoned from Kerak by fast rider, enters the chamber. Road dust still clings to his clothes. He listens to the plan in silence, his scarred face unreadable. When Baldwin finishes, Reynold nods once. "It's insane," he says, "which means it might work. Saladin is confident. He thinks you're trapped in Jerusalem or too weak to matter. If you suddenly appear at Ascalon with an army, it will force him to recalculate." He pauses. "But understand what you're proposing. Once we ride out, there is no retreat. Ascalon is surrounded by open ground. If he brings his full force against us, we die. We die anyway if we do nothing." Baldwin's voice carries absolute conviction. At least this way we die fighting. The decision is made. Within hours, Jerusalem's remaining garrison is mobilizing. Knights check armor and weapons, horses are shod and provisioned. Squires pack supplies for a campaign that everyone knows may last only days. The city watches in silence as its young king prepares to ride south with a force so small it seems like a cruel joke. William of Tyre finds Baldwin in his chambers as servants help the king into his armor. The process is difficult because Baldwin's right hand cannot grip, cannot help. Every piece must be fastened by others, a humiliation he endures with silent patience. "You don't have to do this," William says quietly. "No one would blame you for staying behind walls." Baldwin looks at his former tutor while a squire tightens the straps on his cuirass. "Yes, they would. And worse, I would blame myself." He flexes his left hand, testing the feel of the gauntlet. "When I was crowned, I knew this day would come, a moment when the kingdom needed something from me that I could not give from a throne room. I have always known my body would fail me, but I hoped I would have the courage not to fail my people." "You have never lacked courage. Then pray I have enough for what comes next." The column rides out at dawn on November 20th. 375 knights, their armor burnished, their lances raised, their faces set with the grim determination of men who know the odds. Baldwin rides at their head despite the pain that lances through his legs with every movement of the horse. He has learned to control his mount with his knees and left hand, techniques taught by an Arab riding master years ago when it became clear his right hand would fail. The skill serves him now. They move south through countryside that grows emptier with each mile. Villages are abandoned, their inhabitants fled north toward Jerusalem's protection. Fields lie trampled where Saladin's advance raiders pass through. Here and there they find bodies, farmers who moved too slowly or fought back uselessly. The column does not stop. There is no time. By evening of the second day, they sight Ascalon. The fortress rises from the coastal plain, its walls strong but its garrison minimal. It was never meant to withstand a siege, only to guard the southern approach. Now it will have to serve as the staging point for the impossible. They reach the fortress on November 22nd. Saladin's advance forces are already visible in the distance, scattered units screening the Sultan's main army. Baldwin orders the gates opened and his column rides through just as enemy cavalry appears on the northern ridge. The timing is so close that men whisper about divine providence. Inside Ascalon's walls, Baldwin takes stock. The fortress commander reports that Saladin's main force bypassed the city, heading north toward Jerusalem. But a screening force of perhaps 3,000 men remains to keep the garrison bottled up. The Sultan clearly does not consider the Leper King worth his personal attention. "He thinks we're trapped," Reynold observes. They stand on the walls, watching enemy campfires multiply in the darkness. "He's left just enough men to keep us here while his main force raids at will." "Good." Baldwin's voice is tight with pain and exhaustion, but his mind remains clear. "Then we are exactly where I want us to be. Tomorrow night we send riders to Gaza, fast riders on the best horses. Tell Odo de Saint-Amand to abandon the fortress and bring every Templar knight he has. Tell him the king commands it." The fortress falls silent around midnight. Exhausted men sleep wherever they can find space. Only the sentries remain awake, watching the enemy fires that ring the city like a noose. Baldwin does not sleep. He sits in the fortress commander's chamber, his armor removed, his bandages being changed by the physician who traveled with the column. The process reveals what the king hides beneath cloth: hands that are no longer recognizable as hands, fingers fused and curled, skin mottled with lesions that weep fluid despite constant treatment. The physician works in silence. There is nothing to say. No treatment will stop this. No prayer will reverse it. The disease progresses according to its own inexorable logic, and all medicine can do is delay and manage. When the bandages are rewrapped, Baldwin dismisses the physician and sits alone in the darkness. His body screams at him, every nerve that still functions transmitting pain. His hands throb. His legs ache from hours in the saddle. The disease is winning, slowly but certainly, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. But there are still things he can do, decisions he can make, a kingdom he can serve for whatever time remains. The riders leave for Gaza before dawn, slipping through enemy lines in the darkness. They carry the king's seal and his command. Come, bring every Templar. Leave Gaza empty if you must, but come. The wait begins. 2 days, perhaps 3. If the Templars ride hard, if they are not intercepted, if God wills it, they will arrive. And then Baldwin will have nearly 500 knights, still impossibly outnumbered, but enough to matter, enough to make Saladin acknowledge them. November 23rd passes in tense silence. Saladin's screening force makes no move to assault the walls. They simply wait, confident that time is on their side. Refugees trickling in from the north bring news. The Sultan's main army is pillaging its way toward Jerusalem, spreading out to maximize plunder, encountering no resistance. Inside Ascalon, Baldwin issues the arriere ban, the ancient call to arms that summons every able-bodied Christian to the king's standard. It is a desperate measure, rarely used, calling not just knights, but anyone who can hold a weapon. Squires, servants, townsmen, pilgrims, all are summoned to defend the kingdom. They come in small groups throughout the day, farm boys with scythes, merchants with old swords inherited from fathers, pilgrims with staffs and determination. They are not soldiers. They will not survive a cavalry charge, but they are bodies, and in medieval warfare, numbers matter even when those numbers are untrained. By nightfall, Baldwin has perhaps 3,000 infantry. Most will die in the first minutes of any serious fight, but they do not know that, or if they do, they come anyway. Because the young Leper King, who could have stayed safe behind Jerusalem's walls, chose to ride out, and that choice inspires something primal in men's hearts. Reynold moves among them, his scarred face showing rare approval. These are not professional soldiers, but they have the one quality that matters most. They came when called. That is worth more than training. November 24th dawns clear and cold. The enemy fires still burn in a loose ring around the fortress. Sentries report movement in Saladin's camp, but no sign of attack. The Sultan's forces remain confident and relaxed. They have no reason to fear. At midday, a sentry on the southern wall calls out. Riders approaching, a column of white mantles with red crosses, the Templars. 84 knights ride toward Ascalon in perfect formation. They move with the mechanical precision of men who live by discipline, who train together, who fight as a single organism. At their head rides Odo de Saint-Amand, Grand Master of the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. His face could be carved from stone. Saladin's screening force sees them coming and moves to intercept, but the Templars time their approach perfectly. They gallop the final mile, and Ascalon's gates swing open just long enough to admit them. The gates slam shut with the enemy cavalry only minutes behind. Odo dismounts in the courtyard and walks directly to Baldwin. The Grand Master is perhaps 50 years old, weathered and scarred, a man who has spent his adult life fighting for God's kingdom. He kneels before the young king. "My lord, you summoned. We came." Baldwin gestures for him to rise. "Thank you. I know what I ask. Gaza is now defenseless. Gaza is stone and mortar. You are the kingdom." Odo's voice is flat and certain. "Where do you need us?" The two leaders withdraw to the fortress commander's chamber. Maps are spread across a table. Reynold joins them, along with Baldwin de Bellin, the Baron of Ramla, whose knowledge of the local terrain is unmatched. Saladin is heading north. Baldwin traces the route on the map with his left hand. His right remains hidden beneath the table. His forces are scattered, foraging and plundering. He left screening forces here to contain us, but his main army is dispersed across miles of countryside. They are confident, overconfident. Odo studies the map in silence. When he speaks, his words are measured. You want to break out and pursue him? Yes. With 500 knights and 3,000 infantry against 26,000. Yes. The Grand Master looks at the young king for a long moment. Other men might argue, might list the reasons this is madness. But Odo de Saint-Amand has taken vows of obedience to God's will, and he sees in this dying teenager something that transcends rational military calculus. "When do we ride?" Baldwin de Bellin leans over the map. "The terrain north of here is mixed. Hills, wadis, some marshy ground near Tel Gezer. If we can catch Saladin in the wrong place, where his numbers cannot deploy effectively." He trails off, then continues. "There's a spot near Montgisard. Low ground, marshy after rain, difficult for large formations to maneuver. Reynold nods slowly. If we can force battle there, his advantage shrinks. Not enough to make the odds fair, but enough that we have a chance. We leave tonight, Baldwin decides. After dark, when Saladin's watchers are least alert, we move fast and we move quietly. By dawn, we need to be out of here and shadowing his main force. He looks at each man in turn. Understand what I'm asking. We ride toward an enemy that outnumbers us 50-1. Many of you will die. Perhaps all of us will die. But if we can catch him unprepared, if we can strike before he consolidates his forces, we might win. And even if we don't win, even if we fall to the last man, we will have shown Saladin that Jerusalem does not surrender without a fight. Odo's response is immediate. We are already dead, my lord. We gave our lives to God years ago. The only question is how we spend them. That night, as darkness settles over Ascalon, the fortress becomes a hive of quiet activity. Armor is checked and rechecked, weapons are sharpened, horses are fed and watered for the march. The infantry are organized into rough companies, each led by a knight or experienced man-at-arms. They will never be proper soldiers, but they can march and they can follow orders, and that will have to be enough. Baldwin spends the evening in prayer. The fortress chapel is small and dark, lit only by candles that cast dancing shadows on ancient stones. He kneels before the altar, his bandaged hands folded as best they can manage, his head bowed. The words of the prayer are silent, private, between the king and his God. But the substance is simple. Give me strength for one more day. Let my body hold together long enough to do what must be done, and if I must die, let it be in a way that matters. William of Tyre finds him there as the midnight hour approaches. The archbishop says nothing, simply kneels beside his former student and prays his own prayer. They remain there in companionable silence until a squire comes to whisper that the troops are ready. The fortress gates open silently in the deepest part of the night. Saladin's watchers, bored after days of inactivity, have retreated to their tents or huddle around fires. They do not see the Christian army slip out like ghosts, moving south initially before swinging east and then north in a wide arc that takes them around the screening force. The march is conducted in near total silence, no talking, no unnecessary noise, just the muffled sound of hooves on earth, the creak of leather, the breathing of horses and men. Baldwin rides near the front, his body held upright through sheer willpower. Every step the horse takes sends shocks of pain through his deteriorating frame, but he shows nothing. A king cannot show weakness, not now, not when everything depends on these next hours. They march through what remains of the night, moving parallel to Saladin's route, but staying far enough away to avoid detection. Scouts range ahead into the flanks, watching for enemy patrols. Twice they spot Muslim cavalry in the distance and alter their course to avoid them. The darkness is their ally, and they use it ruthlessly. Dawn of November 25th finds them in low hills east of Saladin's presumed position. The scouts return with remarkable news. The Sultan's army is even more dispersed than hoped. His forces are strung out across miles, some foraging, some resting, many watering their horses at a stream near Montgisard. They are not in battle formation. They are not prepared for attack. Baldwin calls his commanders together one final time. They crouch in a hollow between hills where they cannot be seen from the valley below. The king's face is gray with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes remain clear. "This is the moment," he says quietly. Saladin is in the valley ahead. His army is scattered and unprepared. If we strike now, strike hard, we can break them before they form proper lines. He pauses, gathering strength. "I will not order any man to do this. This is a choice. Each of you must decide for yourself whether you will follow me into that valley." Odo de Saint-Amand speaks first. "The Templars will follow." Reynold's scarred face shows something that might be a smile. "I have waited 15 years for this. I follow." Baldwin de Bellin nods. Ramla follows. One by one, every commander pledges. Not because they believe they will survive, not because the odds are good, but because this dying teenager who could have stayed safe chose to ride out, and that choice demands honor. Baldwin struggles to his feet, his legs barely support him, and Reynold moves to help, but the king waves him off. He must do this himself. He must stand on his own for what comes next. They move to the ridgeline and look down into the valley. There, spread across the low ground near Montgisard, is Saladin's army. Even scattered and unprepared, it is vast. Tents and campfires, horses and men, weapons glinting in the early morning sun. It looks invincible. Baldwin turns to his army, 500 knights on war horses, their armor bright, their lances raised. Behind them, 3,000 infantry, terrified but determined. Before them, 26,000 of Islam's finest warriors. The king dismounts. The movement is awkward, requiring help, and for a moment he simply stands on trembling legs. Then, deliberately, he lowers himself to his knees. Others move to assist, but he shakes his head. This he must do alone. The Bishop of Bethlehem comes forward bearing the true cross, the holiest relic of the kingdom, said to be wood from Christ's crucifixion. The cross is raised high, and the entire army kneels. Baldwin prostrates himself fully, his ruined hands pressed into the dirt, his face against the earth. His voice, when it comes, is barely audible, but somehow carries to every man present. Lord, we are few and weak. Our bodies fail us. But if this battle serves your will, grant us strength for this one day. If we must die, let us die with honor. But if you grant us victory, we will remember forever that it came from your hand, not ours. He remains prostrate for a long moment. Then, with visible effort, he pushes himself up. Reynold is there to help him to his feet, and together they help him back into the saddle. Baldwin draws his sword with his left hand. The blade catches the morning light. His voice, strengthened by some reserve he did not know he possessed, rings out across the army. For God and Jerusalem. The Templars take up the cry. Then the secular knights. Then the infantry. The sound builds and builds until it is a roar that echoes across the valley. And then, as the sun clears the horizon on November 25th, 1177, Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, the Leper King, 16 years old and dying, leads 500 knights in a charge toward 26,000 warriors. The impossible has begun. The charge begins as all cavalry charges begin, with the slow-building thunder of hooves on earth. 500 knights in tight formation, the Templars at the point of the wedge, their white mantles streaming behind them like banners of judgment. Baldwin rides near the front, his left hand gripping the reins, his right hand useless but his body somehow staying upright through sheer force of will. Behind the knights come the infantry, a ragged tide of farmers and pilgrims and townsmen who have chosen this impossible thing. The distance closes. 300 yards. 200. Saladin's forces in the valley see them coming, and the reaction ripples through the scattered encampments like wind through wheat. Confusion first, then alarm, then desperate scrambling as men reach for weapons and officers shout contradictory orders. The Sultan's army is caught in the worst possible position, spread across miles of marshy ground, unprepared and disorganized. Saladin himself is near the center, surrounded by his Mamluk bodyguard. He sees the white mantles of the Templars and understands instantly what has happened. The Leper King, who should have been trapped in Ascalon, who should have been irrelevant, is here with an army, and the trap has reversed. The hunter has become the hunted. The Sultan's voice cuts through the chaos, calling for his commanders, demanding that the scattered forces form defensive lines. Taqi ad-Din, his nephew, rides toward the right wing, attempting to organize resistance. But there is no time. The marshy ground that should have slowed any advance is working against them now, making it impossible to maneuver large formations quickly. 100 yards. The Templars lower their lances. Odo de Saint-Amand rides at their head, his face showing nothing, his body and horse and weapon functioning as a single instrument of war. Around him, 83 brothers do the same, men who have trained together until they move as one organism, until individual thought disappears into collective purpose. 50 yards. The sound becomes overwhelming, the thunder of hundreds of iron-shod hooves on earth, the creak of armor, and leather, the breathing of horses pushed to the edge of their endurance. Some of Saladin's men are forming a line, Shields raised, spears braced. Others are still running toward their positions. Still others are frozen in place, watching death approach with hypnotic inevitability. The impact, when it comes, is catastrophic. The Templars hit the Muslim center like a divine hammer. Lances punch through shields and bodies. Horses collide with men. The carefully maintained formation of the charge dissolves into individual combats, but the momentum carries through. The Muslim line, hastily assembled and anchored in soft ground, simply shatters. Baldwin is in the thick of it, his useless right hand somehow not mattering because there is no time for finesse, only the brutal calculus of mass and momentum. His horse tramples men beneath its hooves. A sword swings toward him, and Reynold, riding close as a shadow, catches it on his own blade. The Baron of Ramla is on his other side, protecting the king even as they drive deeper into the enemy formation. The fighting is unlike anything in normal battles. Usually, cavalry charges either break an enemy line or are repulsed, and the outcome is decided in the first minutes. But here, because Saladin's forces are so scattered and the terrain so unfavorable, there is no single line to break. Instead, there are dozens of small combats, hundreds of individual fights, and the Christians have the advantage in everyone because they came prepared and unified while the Muslims are improvising in chaos. Saladin's Mamluk bodyguard fights with desperate courage, trying to buy their sultan time to escape. These are elite warriors trained from childhood, loyal unto death. They form a ring around Saladin and hold against the Christian charge through sheer skill and determination. Men die on both sides in the savage close quarters fighting around the Sultan's position, but the bodyguard holds. Taqi ad-Din manages to organize a counterattack on the right wing. His cavalry charges into the Christian flank, trying to relieve pressure on the center. For a moment, it seems to work. The Christian advance staggers under the impact. Knights are unhorsed, infantry break and run. But Odo sees the danger and redirects a portion of the Templar force to meet it. The White Mantles wheel with parade ground precision and smash into Taqi ad-Din's cavalry before they can exploit their advantage. The fighting becomes a grinding attrition. Minutes stretch into an hour, then two. The sun climbs higher, turning the valley into an oven where armored men cook in their own sweat. The wounded cry out in Arabic and French and Latin. The dead lie in the mud where they fell. And still, the battle continues because neither side can disengage. Baldwin's world narrows to the few feet around him. His horse, trained for war, fights alongside him, biting and kicking. His left hand holds a sword that rises and falls with mechanical repetition. His right hand is useless, but somehow that doesn't matter because he is still here, still moving, still alive. The disease that has taken so much from him cannot take this moment. Somewhere in the chaos, Taqi ad-Din's son Ahmad falls, killed by a Templar lance. The nephew's anguish is a physical thing, but there is no time to mourn. The battle continues. Men die. Others step forward to replace them. The mathematics of attrition grind inexorably forward. By midday, the Muslim army is breaking. Not all at once, but in sections, units disintegrating as men realize the battle is lost and survival demands flight. Saladin's commanders try to stem the collapse, but panic is contagious. What began as scattered retreat becomes general rout. The Sultan himself is nearly captured. His bodyguard is decimated, barely a dozen men remaining of the hundreds who began the day around him. They force him onto a racing camel, the fastest mount available, and drive him toward the south. Saladin flees toward Egypt, leaving behind his army, his supplies, his reputation. The Christian forces pursue. 12 miles they chase the fleeing Muslims, cutting down those too slow or too exhausted to escape. It is butchery, not battle, the brutal arithmetic of victory. The infantry, armed with anything from swords to farm implements, kill with the desperate enthusiasm of men who know this chance will never come again. Prisoners are taken, but not many. This is not a day for mercy. Baldwin finally calls off the pursuit as darkness approaches. His voice is hoarse from shouting orders, his body beyond exhaustion, moving only because to stop would be to collapse. Reynold rides beside him as they return to the battlefield, and the older man's face shows a satisfaction that borders on religious ecstasy. He has waited 15 years for this. 15 years in a Muslim prison, dreaming of the day when he could hurt them as they hurt him. Today, that dream became real. The battlefield at dusk is a vision of hell. Bodies lie everywhere, so many that it is difficult to ride without stepping on the dead. The wounded cry out in multiple languages, calling for water, for help, for their mothers. Flies already swarm in black clouds. The smell is copper and shit and fear. The Christian forces make camp where the battle was fought. Men move among the fallen, separating friend from foe, dead from dying. The chaplains begin the grim work of recording casualties. The surgeons set up their stations and begin the equally grim work of trying to save those who can be saved. Roger de Moulins, Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, was not present at the battle, having marched north with Philip of Flanders. But his order's duty is to care for the sick and wounded, and his brothers who remained in Jerusalem now move among the injured with practiced efficiency. Later, de Moulins will record the costs in his careful script. 1,100 Christians dead, 750 wounded. For an army of perhaps 3,500. These are catastrophic losses. Nearly half the force is gone. Baldwin sits by a fire, his armor removed, his bandages being changed for perhaps the fourth time that day. The physician works in silence, his face carefully neutral as he unwraps cloth soaked with blood and fluid. The king's hands are worse than they were this morning, the stress of the day having accelerated the disease's progress. New lesions have opened. Fingers that maintained some function this morning are now completely unresponsive. William of Tyre finds him there and sits without asking permission. The archbishop's robes are dusty and stained. He spent the day not fighting, but moving among the wounded, giving last rites, offering what comfort theology allows. His face shows the particular exhaustion that comes from witnessing too much suffering. "You won," William says quietly. "We survived." Baldwin's voice is barely audible. "There is a difference. You defeated Saladin. You scattered his army. You saved the kingdom. For how long?" The king looks at his ruined hands as the physician wraps them in fresh bandages. "We lost 1,000 men today, William. 1,000. And Saladin escaped. He will rebuild. He will come back. And next time, I might not be able to ride out to meet him. Then we will face that when it comes." William pauses, searching for words. "Baldwin, what you did today was impossible. You took 500 knights against 26,000 and won. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand how this will echo through history?" The king is silent for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of someone who has looked into the heart of chaos and survived. "I understand that we are all going to die. Some of us will die from disease, slowly and painfully. Others will die quickly in battle, but we all die. The only question is what we do with the time we have." He looks at William with eyes that are far too old for his 16 years. "Today, I chose to fight, and for one day, that was enough." The night deepens. Around them, the army settles into exhausted sleep. Sentries are posted, but no one expects an attack. Saladin's forces are broken and fleeing. The immediate danger has passed. But in his tent, unable to sleep despite exhaustion, Baldwin knows the truth that William does not want to acknowledge. This victory changes nothing fundamental. His body is still dying. The kingdom's succession is still uncertain. Saladin is defeated but not destroyed. The problems that existed this morning still exist tonight. Only now, 1,000 Christian families have lost fathers and sons and brothers. He thinks about the moment before the charge, when he prostrated himself before the true cross. He prayed for victory, but what he really wanted was meaning. He wanted his suffering to matter. He wanted proof that courage and faith and sacrifice could still mean something in a world that seemed designed to crush hope. And, for one day, he got his answer. For one impossible, perfect day, everything worked. The desperate gamble paid off. The dying king led his army to glory. The mathematics of warfare bent to accommodate something that cannot be calculated, the human refusal to surrender even when surrender is rational. Morning comes cold and clear. The army begins the journey back to Jerusalem. They move slowly, burdened by wounded and prisoners, by exhaustion and shock. The victory is real, but it does not feel triumphant. Too many friends are missing. Too many familiar faces will never be seen again. As they approach Jerusalem 3 days later, word of the victory has already arrived. The entire city pours out to greet them. People line the roads, weeping and cheering, throwing flowers and calling out thanks to God. The clergy leads processions, chanting hymns of thanksgiving. It is a day of pure joy, unmarred by the knowledge of what was lost to achieve it. Baldwin rides through the streets, barely conscious, held upright by Reynold on one side and the Baron of Ramla on the other. The crowd sees their young king who rode out to certain death and returned victorious. They see the bandaged hands and the exhausted face, and they love him with the fierce devotion that people reserve for those who suffer on their behalf. The true cross is carried in solemn procession back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Baldwin follows, walking now because his legs will not support riding any longer. Each step is agony, but he takes them because this moment demands it. The crowd parts before him, reaching out to touch his robes, calling him blessed, calling him God's chosen instrument. Inside the church, away from the crowds, Baldwin finally allows himself to collapse. Servants catch him before he hits the stone floor and carry him to his chambers. The physician is summoned. William comes, and for 3 days the young king who saved his kingdom lies in bed, his body finally claiming the rest it was denied. But Jerusalem has been saved. For now, for this moment. And in the great sweep of history, sometimes a moment is all you get. The monastery rises slowly over the next year. Baldwin commissions its construction at Montgisard on the exact spot where the battle was fought. It will be a Benedictine house dedicated to St. Catherine of Alexandria, on whose feast day the victory occurred. Monks will live there and pray for the souls of the dead, Christian and Muslim alike. Because even in victory, Baldwin understands that war creates only grief. The stones are laid with care. The chapel is built to catch the morning light. Gardens are planted where men died. It is an act of memorialization and reconciliation, an attempt to transform the site of violence into a place of peace. But even as the monastery rises, Baldwin's body continues its slow collapse. By 1178, his right hand is completely useless, the fingers fused into a rigid claw. By 1179, walking becomes difficult. By 1180, he requires assistance to move. The disease marches forward with patient inevitability, taking piece by piece what the king needs to function. And Saladin rebuilds. The defeat at Montgisard was crushing, but the Sultan is patient and brilliant, and he learns from his mistakes. He returns in 1179 and defeats Baldwin at the Battle of Montgisard. He captures a great fortress on the Jordan River. The war continues, and while Baldwin wins some engagements, including a defense at Belvoir Castle in 1182, the strategic situation slowly turns against him. By 1183, Baldwin can no longer see. The leprosy has taken his eyes. He is carried to the siege of Kerak in a litter, blind and unable to walk, but still making decisions, still trying to hold his fractious kingdom together. In 1185, in the spring when Jerusalem's gardens bloom, Baldwin IV dies. He is 24 years old. He has been king for 11 years, longer than anyone expected when the leprous boy was crowned. His body is placed in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, wrapped in cloth that hides what the disease has done, remembered not for what he became, but for what he achieved despite it. His nephew, Baldwin V, inherits the throne. The child is 8 years old and will live only 1 more year before dying in 1186. The succession falls to Guy of Lusignan, the incompetent noble whose marriage to Baldwin's sister Sibylla had been a desperate political compromise. And in 1187, everything Baldwin fought for collapses. Guy leads the kingdom's army into disaster at the Horns of Hattin. The Christians are annihilated. Reynold of Châtillon, the fierce warrior who fought beside Baldwin at Montgisard, is captured and executed personally by Saladin, who is neither forgotten nor forgiven. The Templars are slaughtered. Jerusalem falls in October, 88 years after the First Crusade captured it. The monastery at Montgisard stands for a few more decades before it too crumbles. Time and war and the shifting politics of the region erase it stone by stone. By the 13th century, it is ruins. By the 20th, it is barely traceable. Today, the exact location is debated, the battlefield marked by nothing but empty fields and the occasional pottery shard turned up by a plow. But the story remains. 8 centuries after the battle, historians still study it, still marvel at the impossible mathematics of 500 against 26,000, still try to understand how a dying teenager achieved what experienced generals would have considered suicide. The answer, perhaps, lies not in tactics or terrain or divine intervention, though all played their part. The answer lies in the choice that Baldwin made in November of 1177, when he could have stayed safe behind walls and chose instead to ride out. The choice to fight when fighting seemed pointless. The choice to risk everything when caution was rational. The choice to believe that courage matters even when the outcome is uncertain. Montgisard didn't save the kingdom of Jerusalem. The kingdom fell 10 years later, and everything Baldwin fought for was lost. But Montgisard proved something that transcends kingdoms and battles and the rise and fall of empires. It proved that even when your body is failing, even when the odds are impossible, even when death is certain, the choice to stand and fight still matters. Not because it guarantees victory, but because the act of choosing courage over comfort, sacrifice over safety, meaning over survival, is what makes us human. Baldwin IV was a leper, a dying boy, a king without an heir, a warrior with ruined hands. And for one perfect afternoon in November 1177, he was also invincible. That day has echoed across 8 centuries, and it will echo for 8 centuries more, because some moments are too perfect, too impossible, too human to ever truly die. The monastery at Montgisard is gone. The kingdom is gone. Even the participants, Christian and Muslim alike, are dust. But the story endures. And as long as someone remembers the Leper King who refused to surrender, who rode out despite his failing body, who chose courage when comfort beckoned, then Baldwin IV has achieved a victory that even leprosy, even time, even death itself cannot take away. That is the gift of Montgisard. That is what remains when everything else has crumbled into the earth that once shook with the thunder of 500 knights charging toward the impossible, and somehow, impossibly, making it real. History is full of great victories and terrible defeats. Montgisard was both. Baldwin won the battle but lost the war. He saved his kingdom for a decade, but could not save it forever. So why does November 25th, 1177 still matter? Because it teaches us that victory isn't always measured in permanence. Sometimes the measure of victory is simply that it happened at all. 500 men defeated 26,000. A teenage leper led an army to glory. The impossible became real. Not forever, just for one day. But sometimes one day is enough. Baldwin IV lived only 24 years, spending most of them in pain, his body failing, his kingdom crumbling. Yet, on one golden afternoon, he was perfect. And that day, impossible and brief, has echoed across centuries. Some legacies burn bright and fade. This one did both. The kingdom is gone, but the story remains. And that makes all the difference.